My name is Kate Morrison. I'm 32 years old. And the night my mother described me as a glorified file clerk to a room full of people who were quietly deciding how to treat me for the rest of my life, she had no idea that the woman sitting directly across from her had once called me at 2 in the morning, begging me to save her family's law firm. That detail would matter before the evening was over. 6 hours before the dinner, I stood in my apartment in Charlotte staring at two blazer options and genuinely not caring which one I chose. What I cared about was the folder sitting on my kitchen counter. It had arrived via courier 3 days earlier, and I hadn't told anyone about it except Rue. Rue is my attorney and my closest friend. She's been both since law school, which I attended for one semester before realizing I loved archives more than arguments. She knew about the folder. She knew what was inside it. She also knew I was still deciding what to do with it. The invitation was for my younger sister, Neve's engagement dinner at the Lockwood Club, one of those downtown Charlotte private dining institutions that still requires a jacket for men and an occasion for everything else. Neve was engaged to Rex Alderton, whose family runs Alderton and Associates, a regional law firm with 4 offices and a client roster that included 3 of the largest commercial real estate developers in the Carolinas. My mother, Gail Morrison, had been planning this evening in her head since Rex proposed. She had rehearsed the seating, the guest list, what Neve would wear. She called me twice to ask if I could arrive early to help with the escort cards because I understood organization. When I pointed out that the Lockwood had an events coordinator, she said I was being unhelpful. That was the most recent version of a conversation we had been having my entire life. Neve was the daughter my parents celebrated openly. I was the daughter they celebrated carefully, which is to say, not at all. When Neve was accepted to the business school at Wake Forest, my mother called every relative she had. When I started my company at 26 with a business partner and a van, my mother told people I had taken a job in records. When Neve's first brand consulting project made the local business journal, my father framed the article. When my company landed a 12-year contract with the University of North Carolina's library system, my mother asked if I got benefits. My company is Kessler Document Recovery. We specialize in recovering, stabilizing, and digitizing archives after disasters. Floods, fires, burst pipes, mold events. We work with hospitals, universities, law firms, insurance companies, and municipal governments. We currently have 4 offices, 61 employees, and a contract portfolio that includes 2 federal agencies and a regional hospital network. My parents called it the box business. In the beginning, I tried to explain. I would talk about the chemical stabilization process, about the dehumidification chambers, about the proprietary scanning systems we had developed that could extract legible text from documents that looked like papier-mâché. My father would nod and say something like, "So you dry out wet paper, got it." Eventually, I stopped explaining. Silence was easier than watching someone choose not to understand. Rue called while I was driving to the Lockwood. "You can still turn around," she said. "I'll say you had food poisoning." "Neve didn't do anything," I said. "Neve also never said anything," Rue replied. That was fair. But it wasn't the whole truth. Neve had been controlled by our mother the same way I had. She had just been controlled differently. Where I had been dismissed, Neve had been managed. Every decision she ever made had been steered, filtered, and repackaged by our mother until it felt like Neve's idea when it had originally been Gail's. Neve didn't participate in what happened to me on purpose. She just never noticed it was happening. Rue paused. "Have you decided about the folder?" I looked at the road ahead. "I'm not pretending I don't know what I know. That's all I've decided." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll have my copy." The Lockwood Club's main dining room seats close to 100 people across linen-covered tables beneath a coffered ceiling that was restored in 1994. I knew that because Kessler had handled a water damage event in the building's lower level the previous winter. My parents did not know that. Nobody in my family knew that. Rex's mother met me at the entrance before I could find my seat. Her name is Rowena Alderton, and she is exactly the kind of woman who notices everything and reveals nothing. Silver hair cut close, a dark dress, the particular stillness of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where real decisions were being made. She took my hand and said, "Kate, I'm very glad you're here." I hadn't seen her since the job. I assumed she was being polite. My mother appeared at my elbow almost immediately. "You made it," she said, in the tone of someone who had been expecting a cancellation. "Come meet the Aldertons. Just let me do the talking, don't bring up work." That warning had followed me for years. Don't bring up the box business. Don't make things complicated. Don't explain yourself so thoroughly that people realize we've been wrong about you. I smiled, of course. She had seated me at the far end of the second table, between a retired Alderton partner I'd never met and one of Neve's business school friends. It was not an accident. The arrangement placed me a careful distance from the main table, where my mother and father sat on either side of Neve and Rex, conducting the evening like a rehearsed performance. Dinner began with my mother curating the room. She moved through introductions with practiced ease, offering edited summaries of everyone present, Rex's education, Neve's consulting work, which my mother described with a precision that made her boutique brand advisory practice sound like she was personally guiding Fortune 500 boards. My father contributed specific phrases, sharp instincts, always knew how to read a room, that he had clearly rehearsed. When the retired partner beside me asked what I did, my mother answered before I could open my mouth. "Kate works in records management," she said from across the table. "Corporate filing systems, that kind of thing." The partner glanced at me. "Document recovery," I said. "We restore archives after disasters, floods, fires, water events. We work primarily with institutional clients, law firms, hospitals, universities." The partner's expression shifted. "You do the actual physical recovery?" "That's one part. We also have a digitization division and a proprietary imaging system that can." "She means she dries out wet folders," my mother said, with a light laugh designed to land the joke before I could land the explanation. A few people smiled politely. The retired partner looked uncertain. Rue, seated 2 chairs away, gave me a small shake of her head. For the next hour I watched my mother work the room. She was skilled at it. She had spent decades practicing the art of social positioning, and tonight was a masterclass. Every reference to Neve was expansive. Every reference to me was a parenthetical, minimizing, followed quickly by a pivot to something more interesting. During the second course, I slipped past the divider near the private bar and heard my mother speaking to Rex's aunt, a woman named Barbara who had driven up from Charleston. "Kate has her own little setup," my mother was saying. "She rents some warehouse space, has a few employees. Honest work, but not the kind of thing you lead with at a dinner like this." "Does she run it herself?" the aunt asked. "Well, technically," my mother said. "She does the books and manages the crews, but it's really more of a trade operation, skilled labor." My father added quietly, "We're proud of her in our way." I stood behind the divider and did not move. Then Rowena Alderton appeared on the other side of the bar. She had clearly come from the same direction I had. Her face was composed, but her jaw was set in a way that told me she had heard every word. She looked at me. I said nothing. She said quietly, "Your mother doesn't know what she doesn't know." I nodded. Neither of us said anything else. Just before the main course was cleared, my mother called my name across both tables. The room went mostly quiet. "Kate, the flowers on the center arrangement are drooping. Isn't that your area? You always know how to fix things." 40-some people looked at me. I looked at the flowers, then at my mother. "I restore documents," I said, "not arrangements." "Oh, she's so literal," my mother said, laughing. "You know what I mean, darling." Before I tell you what happened when the toast began, and what Rowena Alderton said that silenced the room, tell me something first. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story has traveled. The toasts began just after 8. My father went first. He spoke about family legacy, opportunity, and the pride of watching Neve step into a future alongside a family of such integrity and achievement. His gaze moved toward Rex's parents when he said achievement. It did not move toward me. Then my mother stood. She thanked Rex's family. She praised Neve's instincts and elegance and the life they were beginning together. For several minutes, she sounded exactly like the mother I wished she was. Then someone near the back, One of Neve's colleagues called out, "And the sister. What about Kate?" My mother's smile broadened. She turned toward me and raised her glass. "Kate is our practical daughter," she said. "Every family needs one. She's never been one for ambition, but she's very good at rolling up her sleeves." She gestured vaguely in my direction. "You'll find her with a box cutter before you'll find her in a boardroom." A few people laughed, uncertain if it was a joke. My father leaned toward Rex's father Hugh and said, quietly enough to carry, "We stopped pushing her toward bigger things a while ago." Hugh Alderton's expression did not change, but Rowena, seated beside him, set her glass down slowly on the tablecloth. Her eyes found mine, then she looked at my mother, then she looked at the glass in her own hand as if she were making a decision. "She's just a glorified file clerk," my mother added, the smile still in place. "And we love her for it." That sentence crossed the room. Neve said under her breath, "Mom." My mother continued, "She's more comfortable in a storage facility than at an event like this, frankly. We're just glad she made the effort tonight." Rowena Alderton placed her napkin beside her plate. She rose. She did not speak immediately. She looked at my mother for one long, deliberate moment. Then she looked at me, and when she spoke, her voice was level and clear and carried to every corner of the room. 2.5 years ago, she said, a water main failed in our building on Tryon Street at 3 a.m. We had 40 years of client archives in that lower level. Our partners were told to expect a full loss, active litigation files, settlements pending execution. We were looking at potential malpractice exposure we couldn't fully calculate. The room had gone completely still. We contacted every recovery firm in the region. Most said the damage was too extensive. One told us to let the insurance company handle what it could and move on. She paused. Kate's team arrived by 6 a.m. They worked 9 days without a full night off. They recovered 89% of that collection, including the documents at the center of 2 open cases. Rex was watching his mother. Neve's hand had gone still on the table. "She didn't ask for a testimonial," Rowena continued. "She sent an invoice and a recovery report, and she got it done." She turned to look directly at my mother. "You have just described her as a file clerk. I want to be precise. She saved our firm from a loss we could not have fully absorbed. I have never used the word glorified in connection with what she does. I would not." Terrence, the Lockwood's operations director, looked up from the service station near the door. He met my eye and gave one small, quiet nod. Rex's father spoke without standing. "Didn't Kessler just take the state records contract?" "Yes," I said, "signed in March." "Multi-year?" 7 years, 31 agencies. A quiet settled differently over the room, not the silence of embarrassment, but of recalibration. People updating their calculations in real time. My mother's smile had not moved, but the color beneath it had changed. "Of course we're proud of her," she said. "I was only teasing, you know how families are." I looked at her. "You paid the deposit for this dinner," I said. The words landed flat and clean. Neve looked up slowly. "6 weeks ago, you called me and said the Lockwood required a non-refundable deposit to hold the date and that you were short. I kept my voice even. You asked me to cover it and not mention it to Neve because you wanted her to enjoy the evening without worrying about logistics." Neve looked at our mother. "You told Rex's family you handled the venue." "We intended to pay Kate back." "You told me it was a gift for Neve," I said. "You were specific. You said, consider it your contribution to her happiness." Then you seated me beside the service corridor and introduced me to the room as someone who sorts boxes for a living. Hugh Alderton's expression had shifted. Neve pushed back from her chair slightly. "Mom, did you take money from Kate for this?" "This is not the moment." "You told me Kate didn't want to be involved in the planning," Neve said. "You told me she'd said so herself." "She was busy." "You didn't ask me," I said. Something moved across Neve's face that I hadn't seen before, not just surprise, but the particular expression of someone understanding, slowly, that the story they'd been told was not the story that happened. "There is one more thing," Rue said. She had been quiet through all of it. She stood now, introduced herself briefly to the room, attorney, legal counsel, and placed a cream-colored folder on the white tablecloth. My mother looked at the folder. She did not reach for it. 7 years ago, Rue said, Kessler Document Recovery applied for a small business innovation research grant through a federal program. The application scored in the top tier. The grant was approved. She paused. A withdrawal was submitted 3 weeks later. The grant went to the next applicant on the list. The room waited. The withdrawal was submitted on Kessler's behalf. But Kate was in Asheville at a professional conference that week, without reliable internet access for 4 of the 7 days in question. The letter was sent from an IP address registered to a residential address in Concord, North Carolina. My mother's address. The letter stated that Kate had reconsidered the expansion and wished to remain closer to home to support her family. Rue slid the top page across the table. The phrasing is nearly identical to an email Gales Morrison sent to Kate's business partner the following week, expressing concern that Kate was overextending herself. The room was very still. The grant had been for $380,000. It would have funded a second facility, 2 additional staff, and an imaging system we eventually built ourselves 3 years later at twice the cost. I had spent those 3 years working 6 days a week out of one undercapitalized location, turning down contracts I couldn't staff, sleeping on the office couch when the commute didn't make sense. I had believed for 7 years that the grant board had found a flaw in our application. You withdrew my grant, I said. My mother's voice was controlled. That is a significant accusation. It's a documented one, Rue said. I was protecting you. Her voice had dropped, gone almost urgent. You were 25. You were taking on too much. You could have failed. You made that decision without telling me. I made a judgment. You submitted a withdrawal in my name and you never told me. Neve covered her mouth with her hand. My father said, whatever happened, she succeeded anyway. You can't hold us responsible for every. I worked until 2 in the morning for 3 years building what that grant would have given me in 18 months. I said. I told you about every closed door, every contract I lost because I couldn't scale fast enough. You sat across from me at Christmas dinner and said, maybe it's just not the right time for expansion, and you knew. The table was silent. My mother straightened. You would take legal action against your own parents. You took action against my company, I said. Being my mother didn't stop you. Rowena Alderton looked at my mother across the table. You took away her right to decide, she said. That isn't protection. That's something else. My father moved behind my mother's chair. We supported her. We gave her what she needed to start. You gave me the floor of your house, I said. And then you spent 7 years telling everyone I sorted boxes for a living, withdrawing my federal grant, and taking credit for a dinner you didn't pay for. Neve reached into her evening bag and placed a small envelope on the table. She slid it toward our mother. That's the money I've been putting into the joint account every month, she said. The one you said was for family expenses. I looked at the statements last month. She stopped. You told me every time Kate succeeded that she was getting lucky. Every time she couldn't grow as fast as she wanted, you told me it proved she wasn't cut out for it. You never told me she paid for the flooring in your sunroom. You never told me about the grant. Our mother began to speak. Neve shook her head. You told me Kate thought I was shallow, Neve continued, and her voice was unsteady but held. You said she resented my engagement because she wasn't in a relationship. You used us to manage each other. She looked at me. I'm sorry, I don't know how long I let myself believe what she told me about you. You were being managed too, I said. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. She accepted that without arguing. My father found me near the staircase an hour later, after the room had slowly, unevenly, resumed something resembling a dinner. He told me I had embarrassed the family. He said a private matter had been made public. He said that whatever my mother had done, she had done it out of love. I listened until he was finished. You laughed, I said. Every time she called me the file clerk, you laughed. Not because you believed it, because it was easier than correcting her, and you chose her comfort over the truth every single time. He told me I was being cold. I told him that coldness and clarity often look the same from the outside. He walked back to the table without another word. On the drive home, Rue asked me what I wanted to happen next. A formal acknowledgement to the federal grant office that Kessler had not submitted the withdrawal. The public record corrected. A settlement rather than litigation, because I was not interested in a trial. I was interested in the record being accurate. My mother signed the settlement 4 months later. It required a written statement to the grant office, financial restitution for documented losses, and a contribution to a fund I created through Kessler, a fellowship for first-generation women entering archival and document recovery careers, specifically those who had no family resources to draw on when starting a business. I could not recover the 3 years. I could not recover the mornings I sat across from my parents and accepted their silence as something other than what it was. But I could build something they had no ability to quietly unmake. Neve and Rex did marry, 9 months after the dinner. My mother attended as a guest. She gave no remarks, she controlled no photographs, she did not decide where I sat. I sat beside Neve because she had spent 9 months proving that an apology was more than something you say when the room is watching. Rowena Alderton and I formalized a consulting relationship the following spring. On the day we renewed it, she sent a small card that said, "To the woman who showed up at 6 a.m. and saved everything we almost lost." I kept it. I used to believe recognition only mattered when it came from the people who refused to give it. I spent years trying to be legible to my parents in a language they had decided not to learn. I adjusted my vocabulary, my accomplishments, the size of the stories I told. None of it worked, because the problem was never my translation. Making me smaller made them feel larger, and they had no incentive to stop. What my mother said at that dinner was designed to stay in that room and shrink me in it. Instead, it put the truth in front of every person she had invited to witness her version of our family. She wanted the room to laugh with her. The room updated its understanding of her instead. The most powerful thing I ever did was not the legal settlement, not the grant correction, not the state contract. It was deciding, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in a private dining room in Charlotte, that I was no longer willing to remain smaller than the truth, to make my mother more comfortable in her version of it. That decision did not destroy my family. It revealed where the damage had always been. And I walked out into the night, carrying none of the shame she had tried to leave in my hands.